Today in a Manhattan courtroom, Donald Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., took the stand in the New York civil fraud case against the Trump family and the Trump Organization, where Trump Jr. is the executive vice president. Donald Trump is the first of Trump's adult children to testify. His siblings and his father are slated to testify later this week and the next. Today, Mr. Trump spent most of his time on the stand putting distance between himself and the questionable financial statements that are at the heart of this case. As a reminder, Attorney General Letitia James alleges that Donald Trump and his top executives, including his sons, conspired to inflate their wealth on financial statements by billions of dollars. And the judge in this case, Judge Arthur Engoron, has already ruled that fraud was committed. So what is left to be decided here is how much the Trumps are going to pay for that fraud. Joining me now is Suzanne Craig, investigative journalist and one of the lead reporters in the New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation into Trump's finances. Sue, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Donald Trump Jr., how plausible is it that he really didn't know what was going on with the company finances?
I find it very unlikely. I mean, anything is possible, but this is somebody who was a senior officer of the company, making the last data that we have when the New York Times obtained a lot of their tax information was $2 million a year once his father went into the White House. It was a substantial increase from what he was making, and it was a nod to how much more responsibility that he was going to be taking on. And he was put in as a trustee when Donald Trump became president. He set up a trust, and the idea was that Don Jr. and Eric, his brother, would go and would be essentially overseeing the company. Eric wasn't a trustee, but Don Jr. was, and Eric has been probably more involved in running the company. But Don Jr. had this very central role as a trustee.
In the trial today, we didn't sort of get to the goods, as it were, right? No. There's more to come tomorrow. Right. What is your expectation in terms of the attitude the prosecution's going to take here? And also, what's your expectation for Eric Trump, who, by all outside assessments, actually knows even more than Don Jr. knows?
Right. So I think they're not created equal in terms of their roles in the company. And I think with Don Jr. Today, he stepping back now. In the weeks before, leading up to this, he hasn't been a presence in terms of a lot of the conversations just about how much he was involved. You're not hearing people say, I went to Eric, or I went to Don Jr. and I talked to him about this. I went to you're hearing I went to Eric and I went to Ivanka, and they come up in terms of decisions that were made. But he's still, his role in the financial statements, I think, is what we're going to get into tomorrow. It started right at the end of the day, and it was interesting. He had a very friendly demeanor for most of the day. The Attorney General was taking a very aggressive stance, the lawyer that was representing the Attorney General. But at the end, when they got down to some questions about his role in those financial statements, those are the statements that were submitted to the financial institutions that are at the heart of this case and showing that they submitted false documents to financial institutions. And these statements, the question was, how much was he involved and what did he know? And he walked right away. He said, I didn't have any involvement. That's what we hire lawyers for. And then he kind of walked that back a bit and said, well, I may have had them, but I didn't know what I was saying was going into the calculations for the financial statements. So he really thread that. So I think we're going to hear more of that tomorrow. And I think a lot more aggressive questioning on that issue. And then Eric will be really interesting because Eric's really been the member of the family that has been running the company.
The organization.
Really has been, and how and when you're here, you've heard a lot about people's dealings with Eric Trump leading up till now. So I think he is going to take a fair bit of time for the Attorney General to go through and is going to be a real focus.
Ivanka has had her role in this effectively thrown out by an appellate court, but she is testifying. And it sounds like it's an open question because Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump would be the ones effectively prevented from doing business if Judge Engoron so decides here in New York City. And there's a question about whether the management of the Trump Organization could be transferred to Ivanka Trump. Is that right? If she chooses that option?
I'm not in that count. I mean, I don't know. And so, I mean, I've heard that. I don't know how it's going to play out. And I think it's going to take such a long time because I think we have to remember, even when this trial is done and there will be a number, there will be a penalty, it's going to go to appeals court. It's going to take a long time to play out. And in the meantime, there's a receiver over the company.
Right.
and that receiver will be there to monitor their business, because eventually some assets may have to be sold to meet that penalty, which could be $250 million, it could be less. And there was an interesting, that before Don Jr. got up, it was pretty dense stuff to listen to, but the expert who was speaking to how much the damages should be was up this morning. And he had said, because of the fraudulent nature of the documents that were submitted, that they got favorable terms on loans just on 4 properties that came to more than $160 million.
Wow.
So that's the stuff that the judge is going to be reading over when he's looking at how much the damages should be. When you think about the kids coming into this, not only is this the company that they have all worked for pretty much their entire lives, except for a year or two in Ivanka's life, whatever is left will be their inheritance. There's a lot at stake here, not just in terms of this is a family business for them and all they've really known. It's going to affect not only what they inherit, it's going to affect their descendants. I mean, this is money that's transferred through generations.
And we should also say it's an open question about how liquid Donald Trump himself is, right? The Post reports that Trump reported earning income about $14.8 million in paid speeches in 22 and 23, collecting $250,000 from the Log Cabin Republicans, about $2.3 million for 4 speeches from the American Freedom Tour. He's selling NFTs, which are pulling in, I think, $5 million, according to the Post. These are large numbers for all of us. But for Donald Trump, who boasts that he's a billionaire, he's making speeches for $250,000, which suggests to me that he needs cash, Sue.
Right. We don't know what his actual walking around money is. We know that he owns a number of businesses. The New York Times in 2020, we got 20 years of his corporate and individual tax returns. And what we learned in that a lot of his businesses lose money. So they're worth money. He's got golf courses. Golf courses aren't worth as much, but he's got some valuable assets. But he's also pumping capital into those, and they're losing money. So what you're seeing here, and when I read this, it's very much akin to, he's got, around the country, he's got businesses, but then he's also got these licensing deals that he had where he would get, he would license his name and he gets a one-time fee. And those are very addictive because you just get the money.
Trump steaks, Trump vodka, Trump ties.
That sort of thing. You're right. And the speaking fees are sort of remind me of that in the Live Golf tournament where he's getting money to host Live Golf tournaments at his courses. That's the sort of stuff that's great because it just comes in the door and it can be used either to plug holes in the businesses that are losing money or for whatever else he wants. But we don't have a sense of, we know his businesses for the most part lose money, but we don't have a sense of just his walking around money.
Well, and how much money, his walking around money and his paying out damages money, right? That's
right,
a real question. $250 million, that's a lot of speeches to the Log Cabin Republicans.
Right, and it's not tax deductible if it happens when he finally writes it.
It is not. Words Donald Trump does not want to hear, not tax deductible. Suzanne Craig, thank you for helping me understand a complicated set of complicated testimony this week and next. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.